Thank you very much. It's a brilliant way of trying to deal with what I'm going to share with you. Because when I received the email by John whether I'm wanting to come for his bridge initiative, the answer is always yes, because I always come when John says, can you come? But when you ask, can you share with you your data, I was more thinking, no, I'm no longer doing that. Because I'm doing this now for several years, and unfortunately, what started already in such a disastrous way got even worse by the years. And I'm actually tired of sharing that. I'm tired of seeing so few who pick up the example from John, who shows how you can do things different. Let me start with the explanation why I didn't want to come. You can see here on the left side, that was the way how Muslims were framed before 9/11. Almost every second report in primetime news showed Muslims in a negative way. In those days, it was not combined with terror attacks. As I said, that was before 9/11. The next bar then shows you after 9/11. You hardly see a big difference. It went from minus 47% to minus 53%. So a little bit before every second report, framing them in a negative way, to now for sure every second report. And when I talk about these numbers, this means every day, every single report in BBC, every day, every single report in CBS, NBC, ABC, every day, every report in French TV, German TV, South African TV, China TV. Not here and there an analysis before, after a terror attack. No. 365 days, every report out there in the news. And each time these reports are referring to Muslim, to Islam, you name it, that's the result. And you would expect after 9/11, that was the deepest point it could get. But no. It went south and south and south and south. And it was here in these rooms where we said we have to change that. We need to start to do something against it. And that wasn't last week. That was years ago. And you look at the result and you hardly see any change. It actually shows us what we tried to do didn't work. Is that right? I'll get back to that later. But at the first glance, you get the impression, Roland, stay home, don't come. But what I would like to share with you today is it has nothing to do with Muslims. It has nothing to do with Islam. If I had known that we are talking in this room, I should have read it more carefully, what John sent me. We are usually in a different room. If I had known that we are in this room, I would have brought you different charts where the titles would be different, but the results would be the same. And they would talk about not him in person or him in person, but about the way how the Catholic Church is framed in the very same media. I just spent the last days in South Africa. Why? Because not only President Zuma, but basically everybody in South Africa is shocked by the way how within a second the rainbow country can be framed under nothing else than being xenophobic. Not Islamophobic, but xenophobic. Because yes, foreigners were killed in South Africa. But these headlines were hurting everybody in South Africa in a way you have no idea. Because for the South Africans, it would be like, if there's something what we really love and how we define ourselves is, we love us Africans. That is what defines us. Nobody would even think of that we would hit another African. And still, yes, it happened. And it was not only hitting, it was killing. But was this killing the right frame for all South Africans? Obviously not. And now comes the changing point. The changing point which I would like to go together with you today is, it's us who are responsible for these results. It's nobody else. It's not here the big club of journalists who we can't reach and who, for reasons I don't know, have decided to come up with these results, which lead then to other effects. I totally agree with every word what you said. I think it was 7 years in this town where I was asked by the CIA, can you please do an analysis how much the way how BBC is framing Muslims is turning converts into terrorists? And the result was very clear. The sad thing was that our data showed it not only for BBC, but as well for France and for Germany. What I would suggest is, let's talk about fear and why people are in a situation that they feel fear and what we can do to get them out of that position. Anne was talking about the bridge and that she loves this image of the bridge. There is no such thing like a bridge where you don't have at least two solid things on one side and on the other side. And if they are not both extremely solid, whatever you try to do as a bridge will not work. It will not last. And we forget on a permanent base that we need to give every individual in our society, whether they are coming on free will or not, that they have this solid leg, at least in one part, that they then can try to do the other step towards somebody else. We can't blame those who are the weakest, who are in permanent fear that they get misled when they get the headlines which you saw, or when they get basically drowned by this type of news coverage. If this is the news coverage, you can't blame somebody who is not at school and who is not educated that he then thinks, I have to do something against them. I need to beat them up. We need to make sure they can't go to school, etc. But it's us who are not standing up and giving the other side of the story, who are not offering to the journalist the other reality. I'm fifth-generation journalist. My grandfather was one of the very first who were no longer allowed to write after 1933. My father had to step down because he was criticizing a Christian Democrat politician. He was the editor-in-chief of that newspaper. But the publisher said, in my newspaper, we don't criticize Democrat politicians. So my father said, okay, I thought I'm in charge of the newspaper. If that's not the case, then I'd rather step down. I know what it means to be independent and to take a stand. But it always takes two to tackle or to tango or whatsoever. If we are not offering the stories, if we are not offering the other side of the medal, then we can come here for the next 10 years, and I'm sure John is going to do the bridge for the next 50 years, and I will just continue with these slides. But we all would feel stupid because we would remember that we have a lot of missed opportunities which we didn't share. Let's look at these things in a little more detailed way. First of all, we journalists have one thing in common. We have difficulties with religion per se. And that's diplomatically framed. 4.4% out of all US coverage goes on religion. That means 96% is without religion. No matter whether it is Muslim, Christian, or Buddhism, or whatsoever. Who is taking care of the schools in America? Aren't there so many religious institutions who are running these schools? Are we not having debates on the quality of education? But if I look at the media debate on education, how many of our representatives from the religious field are represented in that debate? Almost none. How many hospitals in this country are run by the Catholic Church? How many hospitals are run by the Protestant Church? How many hospitals are run by Buddhists? How many hospitals are run by the Muslims? How many hospitals? You get my point. And when it comes to the healthcare reform, when it comes to health and other issues, how many religious leaders, how many managers of those hospitals, which are run by Catholics, Protestants, Muslims, Jews, etc., how many are visible and bring in their expertise as guys who know something about health? Not visible. That's what you end. If you let others reduce you to one topic, then you get pushed into a corner. We talked a lot about freedom of speech, and I learned that you Americans are obsessed with that. I never managed to get into that field. I studied philosophy. When you study philosophy, you study freedom. You don't study the breakdowns of freedom, because there's only one thing which is called freedom, that is freedom. And my freedom ends where yours starts. No matter what I'm doing, my freedom ends in my words, in my actions, in whatever I do, the moment I'm hurting you. So that is why I'm not Charlie. Je ne suis pas Charlie. I got angry when I saw that. I got really angry when I saw all these politicians pretending to be arm in arm and coming up with declarations where I thought, didn't I see you arm in arm 5 years ago when it was Madrid? And didn't I see you arm in arm when it was London? And now all what you got together was that you are exchanging more information about me and John and others? That is your way how you try to find a solution to this? We can do better. But by doing better, it starts with the interest in the other, as you said. But the other is not only the Muslim. You know who is your Muslim? The strange guys with the beards and the dresses? If you're honest, for you, the Muslims are the journalists. You show no interest in our work. I don't fish because I thought it's always boring. But what I learned from fishing is that being successful as a fisherman is not in the moment when the worm tastes good for the fisherman. The worm has to taste good for the fish. We are all experts in debating the quality of the worm. But we are very bad in trying to find time to learn the language of media. We are very bad in learning the principles and the rules of media. You think we are crazy people. Yes, we are. But we are as crazy as you are. We speak a different language than you speak. We play to different rules than you do. But please believe me, we have rules. We have a language, and we show interest. And there are certain principles which make us tick, and there are certain principles which don't make us tick. How much time have you invested over the last years to find out what makes us tick? Do you know what our currency is? Our currency is exclusivity. Why is John so successful? Because John learned the way how journalists tick. He's not writing in one way as an academic, as he used to write his book, and then he sends them to New York Times and says, now print it. No. Each time he thinks, when I want to address the New York Times, I need to speak in the language of the New York Times. And when I want to address the Guardian, I need to speak in the language of the Guardian. And when I want to address the BBC, I have to cut everything short, and I have to speak in the language of the BBC. That's basically what every entrepreneur is doing when he tries to sell his shoes or his shirts. From where does it come that actually we academics got so arrogant? We have this big thing which calls to publish or to perish. But we are only good in a niche of a niche of a niche, which is called academic journals. We get paid for writing. We get paid for doing research. We have everything together, what we media are interested in. Exclusivity means exclusive access to data, exclusive understandings of ratings, and then having somebody who is able to make sense out of that. Why are we not offering that? Aside of John, who is doing that. But as you can see in this chart, it needs more Johns. It needs all of you in order to change that. I'm not going to in this deep mode, but if you look at that, it shows the moment when Christians and Protestants are shown in their way of how they do and how they live their faith. They get much more airtime than the Muslims. There is no religious life for Muslims. Muslims only throw bombs. So if it's possible that the Catholics are shown in the way how they live and pray and work together, and if the Protestants are able to do that, why are we, the Muslims, not able to sell that story to the journalists? It's not per se that they are not doing that. And I want to end on a note which might hopefully wake you up. This is how America is framed in the rest of the world. You are framed in a way you were framed the last time 50 years ago. I thought you had sorted that out. This is the narrative outside of America on America. And the latest headlines from Baltimore are just adding to that. We are not talking about Muslims, right? It has nothing to do with which religion soever. It has nothing to do with which color whatsoever. It has a lot to do with what are we doing in order to outbalance this type of news selection? And how much are we willing to invest in letting journalists understand what we can add, what we can contribute to their paper, to their value? Because as in every human relationship, it's first about the other. And then it is about that he or she maybe writes about me. But you, if you even call a newspaper, the moment you call them, you're only interested in yourself, that they write about your book, that they write about your event. What kind of approach is that? And then you get irritated that journalists turn cynical, that they get impression each time somebody calls me, they try to sell something, and that the journalist then says, well, call my advertising department, you can buy an ad. I want to end on a positive note. This book is called Constructive News. It's the story of the Danish version of BBC. The guy who was in charge of News at 10 in Denmark. One evening he was in his garden and he saw the neighbor's daughter and he asked her, "How are you doing?" She's 13. She says, "I'm miserable." "Why are you miserable?" "We have this school project." "I can't see any problem with having school projects." "Well, I was stupid enough to take the task that I have to tell my classmates every morning, first thing, what was in the evening news. And it's such a disaster. It's only terror attacks, it's only accidents, everything is miserable. I feel really bad. And it's 2 more days. And then it's over, this project week. And I can tell you, I will never ever watch news again. She was 13 and she had no clue that he was in charge of that news program. Next day he went to his colleagues and said, "Well, we obviously have to change something because otherwise we have no audience in future. Let's do something different." So he said, each time when we run a story, no matter what it is, if it's a hospital which goes bankrupt, in future we will only put it on air if we find another hospital which managed a turnaround. If we don't find it in our own country, you go and find it somewhere else. But in future, this story will only be aired once you show both sides of the coin. Stop being blind on one eye. The audience went up, advertising went up. The management of the TV station thought, wow, we let him do 24/7, a CNN version. Same effect, audience up, advertising up. They made him in charge of the current affairs program, like 60 Minutes. Same effect, audience up, advertising up. I always invite him to speak at our conferences. I said, "Ulrich, you need to write it down because none of us speaks Danish." He wrote it. Was a bestseller, unfortunately in Denmark, in Danish. So last summer I said, "You need to write it in English. It doesn't help me that I'm always just promoting you." So he wrote it in English. I took him to Bloomsbury. That's this publishing house which can't walk, full of money because they do Harry Potter. Guess what their response was? "Okay, Ulrich, if you buy 6,000 copies, we are going to print it." Ulrich called me and said, "Well, how sick is this world?" So I said, "Ulrich, if you don't mind, because anyhow we just need a printed version, I can publish it." So we printed it in October. It got sold out in 1 week. The second edition is sold out as well. We are now doing the third edition. The book is nothing. What is more important is he got invited to speak in front of all Belgium TV journalists from the Belgium BBC. 400 journalists. Since 5 months, Belgium TV is now implementing that stuff. Same effect. Audience goes up, advertising goes up. He spoke in front of Swedish TV. Same effect. He spoke in front of Finnish TV. 2 weeks ago, he was in front of the Dutch TV. And even the arrogant Germans sent a delegation of 20 to see him in Denmark. Let's see what comes out of that. The first thing what they requested was, "Can you please translate that? We don't speak English." But basically, there is a lot we can do. There's much more we can do. But it's about each individual of us starting doing that and not putting all the load on John. Thank you.